Hello, hello. Let's see. Am I all live everywhere? Hello. I am Aimee Raupp of aimeeraupp.com, and as always, excited to be here with you guys. Another week of my lives where I get to talk to you about what I think are really important health topics to help you live your best possible life. And for many women on the path to motherhood and trying to conceive, I am here to support you and guide you. And whether you're trying to balance your hormones because you want to get pregnant faster or just feel better, I got the goods to help you. So those of you that are new to me, welcome, welcome, welcome. Again, Aimee of aimeeraupp.com, and I'm the author of a few awesome books. I got some right here. This is one of my this is the actual bestseller book on my list. Yes, You Can Get Pregnant, but I have a couple others. And this is my very first book, Chill Out and Get Healthy, and then Body Belief, How to Heal Autoimmune Diseases, Radically Shift Your Health, and Learn to Love Your Body More. And so today's topic falls into categories that are touched upon in all of my books, and I think is a really important topic of conversation. So for the month of December, we're actually focusing on our Facebook Lives as dispelling myths. Myths that makes no sense from a hormonal perspective or a perspective of fertility. And so that's what this is all about. And so the first myth that we're working on this week is endometriosis and whether or not meat should be avoided for women with endometriosis, or does eating red meat exacerbate or worsen your endometriosis? And so we also have a really great free guide for you on eating for egg quality that I'm going to give away towards the end of this. So in about 20 or so minutes. So stick around for that link. Instagram we'll post it for both of you guys. So just stick around a little bit for that link on my free guide for eating for egg quality. But I want to talk to you about first, what is endometriosis? So let's talk about what the association, the Society for Reproductive Medicine says about endometriosis. Next to polycystic ovarian syndrome, the ASRM, which is the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, states that endometriosis is the second most common cause of fertility issues in women. It affects approximately 20 to 30% of women who are having a difficult time conceiving. Clinically, I see it as even higher than that. I think it's about 40%. It's a female health disorder that occurs when cells from the lining of the uterus, the endometrial lining, grow in other areas of the body, such as the ovaries, the intestines, and the fallopian tubes. With each monthly menstruation, the endometrial tissue responds to the fluctuation in hormones. It can cause menstrual pain, internal bleeding, heavy menstrual bleeding, scar tissue buildup, blocked tubes, and difficulty conceiving. Because endometriosis is the most common cause of anatomical problems that lead to fertility challenges. If you are dealing with any anatomical or structural fertility challenges, you should follow these endometriosis recommendations. So in Yes, You Can Get Pregnant, I have very specific recommendations for endo. And I talk about, the diet, generally speaking, in this book is gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free, and definitely recommends red meat. So let's talk about that because, and if you guys have heard this before, right, this myth or this misconception, you cannot eat red meat if you have endometriosis, I'd love to see a show of hands, and I'd love to see any comments. I know there was some great comments on Instagram last night when we posted this about women saying, would love to hear your thoughts about this because, so let me just see. In Facebook, I don't see any comments just yet. And Instagram, endo is not misplaced uterine lining, endo voice. I got that from the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. So I would love to hear where your information is coming from and then what you think it is. So share that with us, Endo Voice, because I'd love to hear, because that was directly pulled from the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. What we see it as in Chinese medicine, though, and this might resonate with you more, Endo Voice, is that it's basically just, we'll say it's inflammatory tissue, or stagnation, blood stagnation, mucus, phlegm accumulation, that is estrogen responsive, even though in Chinese medicine we don't have estrogen. So we would say it's responsive to the changes in your hormones, to the shift in your hormones. Um, so the septate uterus question, I'm not sure actually falls into today's category of a subject. So you can DM us, or, maybe we can direct you to a place where I do discuss this. But so let's get into some of the data around red meat and endometriosis, because I think I have notes over here on this screen. So if you see me looking that way, it's because I'm looking at this screen. So things that you typically hear: red meat consumption causes endometriosis. All red meat is high in estrogen, which then estrogen exacerbates endometriosis. And red meat causes and or worsens inflammation. Yes, correct. There is no cure for endometriosis. But we can really heal it. I think that's the best way to look at any disease state, is healing versus curing. There's a lot of pressure to cure. In Chinese medicine too, like, we treat what we see. So, I might have a woman who has very little endometriosis symptoms, but maybe she's seen a specialist and has been diagnosed with something like silent endometriosis. But I would still just treat what I see from that perspective, right? And then layer in Chinese medicine, we don't just do acupuncture, right? It's Chinese herbs, it's diet, it's lifestyle. It's all of these things to come together to treat the symptoms that someone presents with. So I might have a case where she has no symptoms of endometriosis whatsoever from an outward perspective, no symptoms of pain or clotting with her menstrual cycle, but she's having habitual miscarriages. That could, from a Western perspective, could also fall into a category of endometriosis, of silent endometriosis. From a Chinese medicine perspective, it falls into a category of poor quality blood and blood stagnation, and the body's inability to hold a pregnancy. And so, I would come at it very differently. And so I think, going back to you too, the endo voiced person, it's like, I don't really care what it is as far as tissue is concerned and what the actual definition of endometriosis is or how it's shifted. And I know it's shifted a lot over the years. What I do care about, though, is the symptomology, right? And typically there's a blood stagnation component from a Chinese medicine perspective, and that's what I'm going after. And we don't really use a term like inflammation in Chinese medicine, but we would maybe say qi stagnation, blood stagnation, poor quality blood, and we need to basically enliven and restore vitality to the tissues, because the way I've seen endometriosis and how it grows, it's like cobwebs and it connects things and it's mucousy and phlegmy, and so to us it's just things aren't flowing properly, and we need to restore the flow. So anyway, going back to the meat. So these are the three main things you hear, right? That red meat's high in estrogen, it causes inflammation, and it causes endometriosis. And so I want to just point out where this data comes from. So there were studies that have shown a strong connection between endometriosis and diets high in red meat and low in green vegetables, which I think that's a really important point, the low in green vegetables. And I think the other thing to point out is that these several studies are actually what are called epidemiological studies, and or basically they're questionnaires. So they are studies that are conducted in a way that it's retrospective. So they're asking a woman who has been diagnosed with endometriosis, what was your diet like, basically? And so, you can't really draw data or conclusions from these types of studies. So just to give you, a good idea, I have something written over here, sorry. There's no consistent evidence. Sorry. Let me go up a little higher. The limitations of observational studies in general. They cannot prove causation, and confounding variables still plague even the most skilled statisticians. So this comes from one of Chris Kresser's pieces. One of the biggest specific problems with these types of studies, so where they've gotten this data, is that red meat has been vilified for years in the mainstream press. So people who eat less of it are more likely to eat less of other foods that are actually unhealthy as well and engage in healthier lifestyles. And these questionnaires are still problematic, a way to gather data about dietary intake. Like, for instance, do you remember what you ate last week for lunch on Tuesday? Or how many servings of red meat you've eaten over the last couple of months, in your history. So to think about that, that's how they're collecting this data. So to understand that these studies are very inconclusive, and also case review studies on red meat and cancer have consistently reported inconclusive evidence. So to understand that most of the data on red meat and cancer is insufficient. And then that also includes the data on the red meat and the endometriosis, that these were based on the one study in particular was the Nurses' Health Study, which was one of the largest and longest investigations into the risk factors of chronic disease in women. And in order to collect such large swaths of information, participants are asked to fill out a questionnaire on their lifestyle habits. And then information is tallied together, and then they gather results. So you can understand how this is not real science. And many scientists, which I was a research scientist before I became an acupuncturist, do not go to these studies for actual data because it's inconclusive evidence. If you want real data, and I always say this to people, even the Forks Over Knives or the China study, same thing. Those are epidemiological. Those are surveys, questionnaires that are given to people and then determined outcomes. They look and say, oh, well, there was a high rate of cancer in this family. Oh, and they all eat red meat. So red meat must cause cancer. That's basically what they're doing, but it never shows causation. And so to understand from a scientific perspective that you're not taking into all the other variables, that like maybe everybody also smoked, or maybe they lived near some kind of, biochemical building that gave off some carcinogenic smoke or whatever. No, they're not taking into these variables into effect. And so that's a really, really, really big point here when we're looking at research and we're looking at data. But in the nurses study too, the people who ate the most red meat were also the least physically active, the most likely to smoke, the least likely to take a multivitamin, and they all had higher BMIs, which is basal metabolic index, higher alcohol intake, and they trended towards lower, less healthy non-red meat food choices. So we cannot take from this research study, which is the largest one that gives us this information about endometriosis, and say that eating red meat causes endometriosis. So I hope that's very clear to all of you. If we want a real scientific result, we'd actually have to pay for a very expensive study where we had two different groups of people, and we gave them, one group just got red meat, and they had to all do the exact same thing. And then we had another group where they all did the exact same thing, and then we measured the results. That's a very expensive study to do, and most people don't go and do it. So keep that in mind. So that's one big takeaway of that red meat causes endometriosis. And what I would say to that too is it's not just the consumption of red meat. It is red meat in conjunction with other lifestyle choices. So for instance, in my books, I recommend, let's look, how much servings of red meat do I recommend a week? I think it's 4 to 6, but I could be wrong because I did write this a while ago. And let's see. I say eat 4 to 6. I was right. Look at me. I did write the book. 4 to 6 servings per week. Consume lean meat such as lamb, venison, grass-fed beef, buffalo, pork, turkey. Grass-fed beef is the only beef you should eat. Pan, sear, grill, or boil. So 4 to 6 servings a week. And then also in that book, I recommend obviously eating a diet filled with fish and eating upwards of 6 and even 8 servings of vegetables a day. So you have to take all of that into account. I also recommend in that book, you need to be sleeping 7 to 8 hours a night, getting to bed before 11 o'clock, meditating, journaling, moving your body, using non-toxic bath and beauty products, right? So all of these things take into account how the food we eat impacts our diet and our lifestyle, and whether or not we have endometriosis, and how to manage it, right? So another thing that people talk about is that there's a high amount of estrogen in red meat. Not if you eat grass-fed beef. That's all I'm going to say. That's the answer to that. I never recommend eating commercially farmed meats. Ever. Once, ever. No, 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 no. So if you eat commercially farmed meats, yes, they are given hormones, they are given antibiotics, they eat a grain-fed diet, they do not pasture, they do not go out to pasture, they are highly inflammatory. And a super important piece to think about when it comes to that is, and I'm going to get into it in the next thing with the pain and inflammation, but is the omega-3 to 6 ratio. So if you are eating grass-fed meat, it typically has a higher level of omega-3. So the ratio of omega-3 to 6 is lower, because most people, they say the standard American diet is, most people have a 10-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, which is a highly, and even higher. Some people have upwards of 20-to-1 if they eat like a very, nutrient poor diet. And so you are setting the stage for significant inflammation in your body. And we know endometriosis is an inflammatory disease. We know that. And so, I mean, that again is in the literature and, in real clinical based, evidence-based literature research articles. So we know that. And so if you are living a lifestyle where your omega-6 to 3 ratio is above a 10-to-1, you are going to be highly inflamed and, yes, more likely to have experienced inflammatory disorders such as endometriosis. So it's about getting that ratio down. And grass-fed beef has been shown to have, I have it over here, grass-fed meat has a ratio of 3-to-1 to 1-to-1, which is the perfect ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. It also has 2 to 4 times the amount of omega-3. So it's actually beneficial to eat for inflammation control rather than harmful. Okay. That is such a huge takeaway. Okay. Endo voice. Oh, you're welcome. So you have to consider that. You have to consider the source of the meat and then how you're eating that meat in conjunction with other lifestyle choices. So you cannot take this data blindly. And this is my number one job, is to empower you guys. That what I see as my number one job. I am not going to spoon feed you the answers. You've got to do this on your own, because this is about empowerment. This is about you deciding that you are in charge of your health, your life, and your fertility, right? And healing your endometriosis, whether or not you're trying to get pregnant. So this is your decision. This is your life. And I know I had some people comment last night when we posted that we were going to talk about this, that they went completely vegan and they felt like shit, and things actually, like, maybe endo shifted a little bit, but then things got worse every place else. I also did, I was on the endometriosis summit this year and did a panel with Dr. Andrea Vidali, who is, like, I think I would say, and he might not say this, but I think he's like one of the top world renowned endometriosis specialists and surgeons. We were talking about nutrition and supplements and diet. And he said that when he operates on a vegan or a vegetarian, he said the tissue literally just completely falls apart. He's like, it's just like, you can tell on the insides that they're a vegetarian or a vegan, because they're literally, their body is so nutrient deprived. So think about that. That's a guy who actually, that's what he does for a living, is surgically remove endometriosis. So he sees it several times a day, several times a week. So that's another really, like, to me, that stuck with me. And I tell every single woman who now asks about being a vegetarian or a vegan for endo. So in the UK, as far as I know, and you guys are always there to correct me and guide me to the right tools and resources, because things are constantly changing, most of the meat is actually grass-fed out in the EU. And so organic is key, which then means it's getting, you typically want, it's just, maybe it's finished on grain, but not fully grain-fed. You really want the grass-fed. So look around, there's local farmers, see if you can get it from there, butchers, but ask too, because a lot of times in the EU, most of the animals actually are still pastured. So I would just do some research on that. Yes, grass-fed bison, elk, if you can get your hands on it, amazing sources of meat. So I lost my track here because I have a little outline. So about the estrogen thing. Only unhealthy feedlot animals being fed antibiotics, pesticides. So remember, pesticides are xenoestrogens. They mimic estrogen in your body. So it's another real big reason that you don't want to eat commercially farmed animal products, and you don't want to use non-organic food sources too, or use pesticide loaded bath and beauty products. All of them mimic estrogen. And so if you already have an estrogen, I don't want to call it dependent, but an estrogen dominant disease state like endometriosis, you do not want to be exposed to pesticides. And chances are you also have genetic SNPs like the COMT and the MTHFR, which further disable your body to process out excess estrogen. So they tend to build up in your system. I'm not one of those people. And so I have to be really diligent about the food I eat and the products I use and the smells that surround me, even the paints in the house, all these things, because I'm super sensitive. My body gets very compromised. And I see that with my endo girls too. So you have to be super diligent. So red meat does not have high levels of estrogens unless it's not grass-fed, okay? So if you don't have an option for grass-fed meat, yeah, then you're not going to eat it. And you're going to find other good sources of grass-fed meat besides beef, okay? But takeaway, healthy animals eating fresh grass or forage. And there's also a really good healendo.com was where, when I was doing research for this, I found this one blog that they have on red meat and endometriosis, myths versus truths. I find that super helpful. There's also from Chris Kresser, he has a whole thing on red meat. It's a special report on red meat. And if you go to chriskresser.com/red-meat, so Chris Kresser, maybe Beth, you want to post this, chriskresser.com/red-meat. He has an entire ebook that you can download for free about why red meat is good for you, the most common myths about red meat and where they came from, environmental impact of livestock, and whether grass-fed or grain-fed meat is better for your health. He also goes into how red meat is one of the best sources of B12, vitamin D, iron, zinc, magnesium, copper, cobalt, and more, right? So zinc and selenium, those are the end mores. So just so you know where I'm getting my data from. And then I also, of course, looked at Natural Fertility Info. I thought their website was not as supportive as it should be. And they are working off of the nurses study information. So again, you really have to be clear on where the data is coming from. This is so important. This is coming from the nurses study, which again is that freaking questionnaire data. It's bullshit. And so, but what the study did also show us though, is not only like, okay, maybe red meat, because the women who chose to eat red meat were probably, they moved less, they ate less vegetables, things of that nature. But what the data did also show, which again is questionable data, but I think you have to take it all in, not just this one piece about meat, is that eating 13 vegetables 13 times or more a week, so that's only 2 servings a day. I recommend 6 to 8 servings a day. Women were 70% less likely to have endometriosis. Fresh fruit 14 or more times a week, so that's twice a day, 40% less likely to have endo. And so endometriosis is an estrogen-related disease, and certain foods appear more estrogenic. But so to keep this in mind that the solution, there are many health benefits to eating. So they do say it in their article too on Natural Fertility Info. There are many benefits to eating grass-fed organic meats in moderation. They give you a good omega-6 to 3 ratio. So again, we want that ratio ideally to be 3 to 1 or 1 to 1. So 3:6 to 1:3. Did I say that right? Sorry. Omega-6 in a 3 to omega-3 in a 1. That is like a really good ratio. Do you recommend DIM for endo, and can you take it during an IVF cycle? So I'm very careful with DIM, but I think it's a really appropriate question for this live, so I'm going to answer it. DIM is non-discriminate. It clears out good estrogen and not so good estrogen. So some endo girls, it's not that they're estrogen dominant. They actually might have an estrogen deficiency. It's the ratio of estrogen to progesterone that's really important to look at, not necessarily that every endo girl is estrogen dominant. So you don't want to clear out the good estrogens. Instead, what I'd recommend, it's in my book Body Belief, but it's my liver support juice, is the best thing for clearing out the bad estrogens, or eating upwards of, like, in your 6 to 8 servings of vegetables a day, that like half of those are cruciferous vegetables. It's the best way. And DIM comes from it's something called sulforaphane, which is actually what clears out the excess estrogens. And sulforaphane, guess where it's naturally found? In cruciferous vegetables. So I highly recommend going for cruciferous vegetables over DIM, unless you know for certain you are estrogen dominant, meaning, and I personally only recommend the test called the Dutch test, the Dutch complete test, DUTCH. You can look it up on their website. And if you want to work further with me, just message my team and we can help support you. But no animal byproducts means immunity issues. Okay, never mind. No hormones and no irradiation. So those are the things. If you're going to eat meat, it's got to be grass-fed. And then I did also look at this greatest.com. They have an interesting article on endometriosis, 5 foods that help manage endo. So they talk about omega-3 rich foods like salmon, leafy greens, low FODMAP foods, which is one of the only articles I've ever seen do that, which it's interesting because even though endo isn't technically an autoimmune condition, I do see that many women with endometriosis do extremely well following my Body Belief diet, which is an autoimmune diet. And then even more if they have severe GI stuff, that they go low FODMAP, and it really makes an extreme difference. And I think it has something to do with absorption, that you're basically micronutrient deficient because you're eating foods you cannot absorb. And then your body just gets inflamed and toxic and more likely to have the endo or not be able to heal the endo. So removing foods, which my diet in Body Belief is an elimination diet. I don't recommend food testing because I don't think it's actually accurate. But anyway, improving absorption capacity and actually getting your body the food it needs and at the micronutrient level will help heal your endo. So I thought this was interesting. But so in this article, it says foods to avoid: trans fats. Obviously, we know that. Bad for us, bad for us, bad for us. Gluten. Again, we know that. And then it says red meat. But this is what it says. Bacon lovers, don't shoot the messenger. So again, this is another study that was a epidemiological or survey-based study. It's fair to mention that recent studies have found no link at all between red meat and endometriosis. Okay. While eating a lot of saturated fat via red meat may generally not be the best thing to do, it doesn't mean you can't ever eat it. So this says limit your red meat to twice a week. It doesn't mention anything about grass-fed. So I think that's a huge miss on their part. But do you recommend dairy for endo, organic dairy? Typically not. So again, in Chinese medicine, endo has that very phlegmy, kind of gummy consistency, and it's like, if you look up pictures online of what endo looks like, and it's very like mucousy and like globuly. Dairy is one of the most and best things to form mucus in the body. So we typically recommend no dairy if we know there's endometriosis. Most of my endo girls also have Hashimoto's. It's very common to see the two together. Hashimoto's, absolutely no dairy. So no dairy, no gluten, no soy. Okay, so I want to make sure I've gotten to all my highlights. And I just also want to check Facebook for comments, questions. Sorry, I have a new mouse. I got all these new tools because my back started hurting sitting at my desk. And this is the most I've ever sat at my desk in the history of my life. This is news to me. Randomized controls are where it's at. There you go, Kristen. Red meat and myths. What are your views on CBD oil for inflammation? So I have a whole thing I did on CBD oil. You can look through my Facebook lives, Nikki, and I answer it there. Okay, so thank you. And if you need any more help, just message my team. Okay, no soy. Does that include miso? Again, as I talk about in my books, I cover this, but a little bit of organic, fermented, non-GMO miso a couple times a week is perfectly fine. Okay, so again, let me just go back to my notes. So now we're clear on estrogen and red meat is not really a big deal, especially if you're eating the right kind of meat, okay? Commercially farmed animal products, yes. Super toxic, high on estrogen. Red meat causes pain and inflammation. So, there's these things called prostaglandins, and they deal with hormones, and they basically create an inflammatory response in your body to help heal. and then they create an anti-inflammatory response. It's very interesting. They're very fascinating hormones. And so there was this thing about red meat being high in prostaglandins and worsening endometriosis symptoms, and that's why you should avoid red meat. However, that's a lot of misinformation, because prostaglandins are kind of found in many different areas, and they're made from omega-6 fatty acids again. So it comes back to that same conversation that, yes, commercially farmed red meat or any animal product is going to be higher in omega-6 and higher in prostaglandins, which may increase inflammation. But remember, we all need inflammation. That's how our body actually heals itself. And prostaglandins are fascinating because they actually come in and they're anti-inflammatory too. So they're inflammatory and anti-inflammatory. So you don't want to eliminate, it's just like histamines. We can't eliminate them from our life. They're there, they're necessary. It's about what they're paired with. It's about moderation. And I really think it's about the source. So again, if you're eating grass-fed animal products, you are going to have a better omega-3 to 6 ratio, and they're going to be less inflammatory. So most people, and if you guys work with me privately or in one of my coaching groups or in one of my courses, you know I love to look at that omega-3 to 6 ratio, because that is a huge indicator of success with fertility, and it should be below a 10 to 1. Even better, if we could get it down to like a 3 to 1, you're rock solid. What about GMO meats? So genetically modified meats, absolutely, I wouldn't touch them. I wouldn't touch anything genetically modified personally. So keep in mind, that's like the big takeaway is that, and this I'm getting from Heal Endo too, saturated fat is not to blame for your endo pain. Lack of omegas, imbalanced omega-3 to 6 ratio, and quality of omega-3s are most likely the culprit. So, I am a huge proponent of, I like good quality fish oil. I tend to recommend cod liver oil, 1 to 2 teaspoons a day. I have all my recommended supplements on my website, so you can go there under Aimee's recommended supplements and see all the things that I have gone through and chosen specifically for you. We stay on top of it. We update it regularly. We're constantly looking at the data, the ingredients, the research. I recommend, depending on the case, but 2 to 3 grams of a really good quality fish oil every single day. And that is a good way to get that omega-3 ratio up. I was getting sick from the water in my house, and I've had to be drinking water from water bottles. How bad are, okay. So again, not for this conversation, Jenny, love you, or Janine, but you can go to my website and see the different Facebook Lives. I've definitely covered plastic in different Facebook Lives. I talk about it in my book. So you can reach out to us if you need guidance on where to get that information, but I'm not going to talk about it today. Okay, so does anybody have any last questions about endometriosis and meat? And then, and I know someone asked if these are recorded. Yes, they always are. We always upload them to YouTube. They live on my Facebook page, and they also live on my Instagram Live. So this will go live shortly. Can you have too much omega-3s? Not that I know of, but maybe at some point. I think too much omega-3s can actually be detrimental. Chris Kresser talks about that a little bit, but I think if you stay in the 2 to 3, sometimes max 4 gram range, it's good. But you basically don't want to lower inflammation at all across the board. You need some inflammation for proper functioning, and you need inflammation to get and stay pregnant. Hashimoto's and endos seem to go hand in hand together, unfortunately. I know, I see it all the time. Okay, guys, so I'm seeing, thank you for all the info. Processed meats are bad. Yes, exactly. So thank you guys, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. And I will be back next week with another myth. So keep an eye on Instagram and Facebook to see what I'm going to be talking about next week. In between now and then, if you need more information on me, go to aimeeraupp.com. Information on how to work with me, my guides, my groups, my books, all the things are there. Okay? Love you all. Have a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful day. Ciao. Oh, Instagram. Sorry. DM us for the Eating for Egg Quality guide, and Facebook will post it right now.